He was born under the weight of bondage, in a world that saw his body not as a vessel of spirit or will, but as property. The year was 1838, Crawford County, Arkansas. A nation stirred with unrest, and a child named Bass Reeves entered into it with the quiet inevitability of destiny. No stars heralded his birth, no ink foretold his life. He was not yet myth or marshal, not yet the man who would stride into legend astride a black horse beneath a wide frontier sky. He was a slave, a boy born into the grasp of George Reeves, a cotton planter and politician who would, perhaps unknowingly, own the childhood of the man who would one day surpass him in history. For the first decades of his life, Bass belonged to another. Yet the call of freedom echoed even then, in whispers among enslaved hands, in the sermons of traveling preachers, in the distant thunder of a country careening toward civil war. The man he was assigned to serve, George's son, Colonel George Reeves, would drag him into the service of the Confederacy. But fate, ever watchful, cast a different hand. In the fog of war and under the veil of confusion, Bass escaped. Stories differ. Some say he fled after a card game gone wrong. Others whisper of blows exchanged between the master and man. But what matters is that he ran. And he did not stop running until the trees of Arkansas gave way to the red dirt of Indian territory. And there, amid the nations of the Creek and the Seminole, the Cherokee and the Choctaw, he found his first taste of freedom. Among Native Americans, Reeves became fluent in their tongues. He learned the lay of the land, how to read a trail like scripture, how to fire a gun with the calm of finality. And though he could not read or write a single word, he carved language into the landscape through action, through memory, through an indelible sense of right and wrong forged in the crucible of lawlessness. Years passed. The war ended. Slavery, on paper, died. And the West called. In 1875, Isaac C. Parker, the hanging judge of Fort Smith, took office. With jurisdiction over 75,000 square miles of Indian territory and a mandate to bring order where chaos reigned, he needed men who did not flinch at danger, men who could track a fugitive through brush and canyon, across rivers swollen with spring rain, through towns that bore no law but the barrel. And someone told him of a black man who knew the land like it was kin, who could speak the languages of the 5 civilized tribes, who rode like lightning and shot straighter than a promise. Bass Reeves was sworn in as a Deputy U.S. Marshal under Parker's rule, a black lawman in a world still licking the wounds of emancipation. The irony, cruel and poetic, could not be missed. Once a slave, now an agent of federal justice, wielding the badge of the same government that once sanctioned his bondage. He rode with a Colt .45 on each hip, often reversed for a quicker draw, and a Winchester rifle across his saddle. He dressed with the neatness of a preacher and carried an aura that was part sermon, part storm. The badge gleamed like a star plucked from some just universe. Bass Reeves was no man's servant now. He was the law, and his justice would be swift and relentless. Over the span of 3 decades, he would arrest more than 3,000 men and women. He would kill 14, always in the line of duty, always with a sorrow that settled in his bones. He wore disguises, sometimes posing as a drifter, a preacher, a farmer, or a fugitive himself. He'd bake biscuits, ride alone for weeks, sleep beneath the stars with one eye open. He would memorize arrest warrants, relying on perfect recall and oral tradition, never once needing to read the names of the damned. And when he rode into a town, outlaws would scatter like crows, startled from a carcass. There was the time he captured 2 brothers, holed up in the winding Stair Mountains. Disguised as a weary tramp, he earned their trust, shared their fire, even cleaned their weapons, until he turned them upon them, shackled their wrists as they slept, and rode them back to Fort Smith bound in chains. There was the man who swore Reeves would never take him alive, only to fall in a gunfight that ended as quickly as it began, a single shot echoing across the valley. Reeves killed without hate, enforced without fear, but he was not invincible. His life was haunted by moral shadows. One of the deepest wounds came not from a bullet, but from blood. His own son, Benjamin, was accused of murder. Reeves, loyal not to kin but to the law, arrested his boy himself. The act shattered something in him. He reportedly aged overnight. A man who had faced down hundreds of gunmen now faced the merciless court of his own conscience. Yet even in that moment, the badge did not tremble. Time wore on. The territory shifted. Oklahoma became a state in 1907, and with that statehood, the federal jurisdiction of the U.S. Marshals was limited. Reeves, by now in his late 60s, was too old to chase men across deserts and rivers. But he did not retire. He joined the police force in Muskogee. At an age when most men surrender to memory and in pain, he walked the beat. It's said that during his time as a city officer, not a single crime was committed in his assigned ward. He died in 1910, his lungs succumbing to Bright's disease. He was 72. No great monument was raised. No songs were sung. He was buried in an unmarked grave, his name whispered by a few and forgotten by most. But history, like the prairie wind, never forgets forever. It returns. It revisits. And when it does, it carries with it the scent of gunpowder and justice, of hoofbeats and hymns, and the memory of a man who did more than uphold the law. He defined it. In time, some began to wonder, could Bass Reeves have inspired the Lone Ranger? A masked man, a black horse, a quest for justice, familiar symbols. Historians debate the connection, dissecting myth from fact. But even without the mask, the legend holds, for the Lone Ranger was a tale told to children, while Bass Reeves lived the tale, forged it in blood and dust, and never needed fiction to enhance his myth. He was not a man who sought fame. He was a man who believed in duty, in honor, in the sacred weight of the badge. And in the end, that is more powerful than any legend. He rode through a land soaked in violence, where the line between law and outlaw was as thin as a rifle's sight. And through it all, he remained unyielding. A black man in a white man's world, carrying a star and an iron will. They called him the indomitable Marshal, the dark rider of justice, and the law west of the Mississippi. But those were names given later, long after the dust settled and the papers yellowed. In his time, he was simply Bass Reeves, a man of few words and resolute action. A man whose silhouette against the setting sun became, for those who feared him or revered him, a symbol of something larger, something righteous and uncompromising. He rode not for vengeance, but for balance, not for glory, but for peace. And though his grave bears no name, his legacy is etched in the frontier itself, in the wide skies of Oklahoma, in the court records of Fort Smith, in the silent awe of those who now read his story and wonder how such a man could be lost to time. But he was not lost, not truly, because legends like his, buried in silence, only await rediscovery, and when they rise, they carry with them the full weight of history, raw, unvarnished, and undeniably powerful. In every badge pinned today, in every courtroom where justice is spoken, in every quiet act of courage performed without witness, there echoes the spirit of Bass Reeves. Not a lone ranger, a real one, a man, a marshal, a myth reborn.